I think every now and then a reader journeys through the worst possible book of their reader life, and I think I finally found that book in this January wrap up. What is up, book babes? It is that time, that wrap up time where we get ready and we chat about the books I read this month. Now, something I've loved doing on this channel is trying different types of genres. I love fantasy. Fantasy will have my heart forever, but you're gonna see this wrap up is filled with multiple genres because I wanna push myself and push you to read books outside of your normal comfort zone because you just never know what you'll find. Starting with Daughter of Fortune. So if you saw my last wrap up, I actually finally tried an Allende book. I tried House of Spirits, and that was the most depressing book ever, but it was also super gorgeous. Like, I could totally see why she is this amazing, incredible, renowned author. What a lot of people don't know is that House of Spirits is actually the third book in a series, and the first book is Daughter of Fortune. And let me just say, that book just stole my heart. It was way more wholesome. I definitely recommend it. It wasn't as tragic as friggin' House of Spirits, and the men written in Daughter of Fortune were just way better than House of Spirits. We follow Eliza, who is an orphan, and she was adopted by this wealthy family that is living in South America, and she of course ends up falling in love with someone who leaves off to San Francisco for the gold rush. So this does take place during that gold rush era, which I think is so interesting. But Allende made a note that she saw so many stories about men making a fortune or losing all of their money during this era, but she never heard stories about women and why they would even go, because during that time traveling through California was insane. I feel like it's maybe a little insane right now too, but at the time there were no cities. Sacramento, San Francisco, all of that was barely developing into what we know today. Of course, California was a part of Mexico, if you didn't know. The colonies basically stole it from Mexico, and that's how we have California today. So of course there were towns that existed, but they were also still recently developing. So there was really nothing that existed there as Eliza's making her treacherous journey. Now, there were so many unexpected point of views here, and I was just left bamboozled. I think if I ever make a video around Allende's series, I'm just gonna call it Bamboozled by Allende, because she gets me every time. Every time I think I know what this book is about, it is completely different. I am just thrown off guard. I highly recommend this book. I ended up giving Daughter of Fortune 5 stars, which is the gorgeous weaving, the storytelling, the tapestry that is this book is absolutely stunning. I hope you try it out. And I actually did get a few DMs from a few of you that said you have now bought House of Spirits and Daughter of Fortune. I will be continuing on to book 2, which is Portrait of Sepia, and I can't wait to see how these stories connect to House of Spirits. Now, I read the freaking famous book, insane award winner from last year, Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I've already read some of R.F. Kuang. I read Babel, huge chubby book, but I've heard so many things about Yellowface, and let me just say, the way people described it as a car crash that you can't look away from is so accurate. That book was like sipping hot tea. It was just full of like gossip and something you couldn't believe but also could believe. The main character is June, and she actually directly talks to you. She's telling you like, I know what you're thinking, that I'm probably super racist for doing this and this, but wait until you see my point of view. That's the type of writing that you'll find in Yellowface. This follows June, who is very jealous of her literary rival, or maybe not even a rival because June just isn't that high in the author world. She is very jealous of Athena, who is this Asian author that is doing very, very well for herself. And then on a tragic day where they're spending time and just bonding, Athena straight up just dies. She chokes on a pancake, which this book is supposed to be satire as well, and June ends up stealing an unseen manuscript from Athena. Isn't that insane? And she ends up publishing that work as her own. And so this book is supposed to critique the publishing industry. R.F. Kuang is basically exposing what happens behind the scenes, how publicists, how editors, how these whole teams don't actually care about diverse reads, and they all just use each other and just play on each other's hype. Now, what's crazy is that in this book, R.F. Kuang actually uses real publicists like HarperCollins, Penguin Teen, all these names are actually in there, and she's not directly saying that they are the ones doing this. She's just saying like the publishing industry in general is jacked up. And when you read all of this and you read the type of dialogue in there, I feel like if you're a person of color, or maybe you've spent a lot of time around people of color, those comments you read in there, like what people say, aren't really surprising. And so for me, while I was reading this, I was like, yep, I've run into that comment before. Yep, I've run into that one. Yep, I've seen that before. It was unfortunately just so true and so sad. And I told a few people as I was reading this book, because I give updates on Instagram. You can definitely check out the link below if you want to follow me on there too. I told a few people on there that I've met so many Junes in my life. I met so many Junes that think maybe I just got an opportunity, or other people are getting opportunities just because they are Asian, Mexican, Black, whatever. I think if you've never had to touch these topics, this might be a good book that really puts in your face a lot of things that happen. I mean, it's gonna be very clear, it's gonna be very obvious. And June is a character that excuses everything, stealing the work, saying she deserved this, all the entitlement, all of the things that you see a lot of Twitter trolls say. June is the one that says it. The book she publishes focuses on Asian laborers during World War I, I believe. It's been a while since I read this book, and she's not Asian. She's a white author in this book as well. But her team goes really far, like using her middle name as her last name and saying that she's just gonna say it's her new author name when that middle name is Song, a very traditional Asian last name. And the way that June just excuses that and also gets offended when people expect her to be Asian because of her last name and she isn't Asian. She's like, why are you discriminating against me for my last name? I was like, how ironic, right? How ironic that we see her feeling discrimination by her last name. Okay, I'm not even gonna go into that. This book was wild. I can see why it was popular, and I was also telling people like, what does that say about us that we can't stop reading this book, right? We can't stop reading this disastrous book. The ending felt a bit over the top and like cheesy for me, but at the same time, I think that's the point. Like, it is a satire, it is insane. It is R.F. Kuang, I heard, also critiquing herself because she does come from privileged backgrounds as well. So there is a lot of mix in there. Don't think it's just like hating on one thing. It's really critiquing all the elements that go into this happening, that go into the publishing industry being unfair, people using each other, the very clear racism that is still out there. And honestly, I just think this is such a good book to read because the way June speaks is something that you will encounter in the real world. That is just crazy, bizarre, entitled, excusing yourself, just a lot of insane things. I ended up giving Yellowface 4 stars. It kept me so entertained. I still feel like it could have made some harder points. I love that our other character, Athena, who's the famous author that died, she isn't perfect either. But that doesn't mean that we can use racism against her and do all of these things just because she wasn't perfect. But I actually love that the author didn't make our other character and the rival perfect, because it really fights against the stereotype that you have to be the perfect immigrant to be treated fairly, or that you have to be the perfect BIPOC to be treated fairly. If you have not read it yet, read it, come back, let me know what you think. It's so wild. I thought I was gonna read it slowly and I ended up just binging that whole thing. Now, of course, I read some YA fantasy during this month, and I actually finished This Cursed Light, which is the sequel to This Vicious Grace. I've had the author on this channel. I loved her so much. I was really geeking out over her, and you can check out that interview after this video. I will link it down below. Now, I'm not gonna give any spoilers. I really never give spoilers during wrap-ups, but if you really don't wanna hear anything about the sequel, then skip this a little bit so you don't hear anything about This Cursed Light because you haven't read This Vicious Grace yet. The Last Finestra, which is just a duo, is one of my favorite romantic books of all time. Alessa and Dante just mean so freaking much to me. Their banter, their sweetness, the romance, the chemistry, it's just so organic. And this is something I highly complimented the author on, because sometimes you could see that it's really forced. I think that's something that's really hard to write where it just flows, and that's something I love about this book. So it was still an epic fantasy. There's still so much we saw about Dante, and I think the author was so right when she said This Vicious Grace is very obviously about Alessa, but This Cursed Light is a Dante book, and he is one of my favorite MC characters of all time. He is so tender. He is struggling with his identity after what happened in This Vicious Grace. There is so much we have yet to learn learn about him. And this is a book where we get to do it. And I was really surprised that the author really went there. Like, we really went into his family. We really went into the trauma. We really went into what he was struggling with. And of course, the chemistry between those two characters was just, I was just like geeking out. And I feel like that says a lot because I'm not a huge romance book person. I still really appreciate all other elements that go on in this book. All in all, that was a really good conclusion to this duology, and I really can't wait to see what Emily Thied comes up with next. And it actually sounds like she wants to dive a little bit more into the romance realm, maybe a little bit dark romance or smuttiness or something like that. So she might actually pivot away from YA romantasy or fantasy romance and into something different. Either way, I really enjoy her as a writer, so I can't wait to see what she does next. At the end of the day, I gave this Cursed Light 4 stars. I was actually fortunate enough to receive an ARC from A Fragile Enchantment, and it was a really nice book to read after reading Daughter of Fortune because I needed something lighter and sweet and wholesome. I actually really enjoyed A Fragile Enchantment, mainly because our main character Niam has this beautiful magic where she can weave her emotions, whatever she's feeling at the time that she's sewing, into her garments. So you can wear a dress of nostalgia or a jacket of encouragement, all these different things, and oh my gosh, the magic was just so sweet. I really wanted to wear one of Niam's creations. By the way, if you're enjoying all these shenanigans and you're not yet subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and catch more of these videos. So fortunate for her, she was actually requested to be there for a royal wedding and to make the wedding dress for the future princess and for the crowned prince, of course, his suit and everything. But of course, the prince and her actually end up having a vibe. They end up having this little romance between them. She's really not welcome there. Like, her people are not welcome there. Her magic isn't really welcome. She's seen as lower class, of course. This is a royal who can't just marry just anybody off the street. Not to mention there are a lot of issues in this kingdom, and she starts uncovering a lot of secrets. It really is a fragile enchantment. There's just so much going on. It's all hanging by a thread. We have a lot of interesting characters, and this is like a historical romance. This is a Regency romance because it has to do with the crown prince and the king and like all of these things. And it was just a very easy, soft story to read. I've read Alison Staff before. She wrote a Wilder Magic, and I had an issue with the pacing at some point. I thought her world building and atmosphere was absolutely beautiful, just like in A Fragile Enchantment, but A Fragile Enchantment has way better pacing than a Wilder Magic. So I think if you like that book, you'll probably like this one as well. And if you weren't a huge fan of the other one, maybe it was a pacing issue and you'll like A Fragile Enchantment a lot more. Either way, I thought it was really sweet and I ended up giving it 4 stars. And I think the fact that the author made me want to wear the MC's dresses. I just want her items. It says a lot about her writing and the way she really portrayed her character. I have yet to make a video about this, but I'm actually doing the 12 Recs challenge with some of my favorite bookstagrammers and some of my favorite booktubers. And this next book, Cackle, was recommended by Lota at Lota's Nook. I love her videos. If you have not checked her out yet, make sure you do. She is so funny. She always cracks me up and she is so creative. Definitely check her out. I'll link her channel down below. I've heard about this book through the grapevine as well. I just made it a priority for this rec. And man, I have some mixed thoughts about this book, but I did not expect to like it as much as I did by the end. So this book started off pretty freaking slow. I was just like not really invested in these characters, and the main character felt so annoying to me. She was just so obsessed with this loser boyfriend. She was constantly talking down to herself in a way that was just so frustrating. This is repetitive. I'm really not interested. I'm really not invested in her story or who she is. When she finally has to move away because her long-term boyfriend breaks up with her when she thought they were gonna get married, she ends up running into this really weird character who's basically, I mean, she's a witch. Like straight up, there's something really off about her. And there's a lot of things that I noticed about our main character that, you know, I was taking notes as I was reading. I was like, she seems obsessed. She seems insecure. This is anxious attachment. If you've never seen secure, anxious anxious avoidant attachment stuff, make sure you Google it. Psych major, I think about these things a lot, and I was right, okay? This book really was about people pleasing, about being anxious, about just hanging on to any person that will accept you and having no self-worth or enjoyment and solitude, like all these things that hopefully people journey on and get better so they feel more secure with themselves and in their relationship. So that's basically what this MC is going through. She does not know how to be alone. She's still obsessed with this boyfriend that clearly mistreated her and doesn't care about her, but now she also has this friend who's just so controlling. I mean, she basically jumped from one dependent relationship into another, and I think that is something I really appreciated about this book. It does highlight obviously the bad aspect of anxious attachment in romance relationships, but it also ended up highlighting the bad aspects of anxious attachment in friendships. So just because they're your friend doesn't mean it can't be toxic, doesn't mean that you don't need boundaries. And that's something that even I've learned the past few years, that having better boundaries attracts better people, that, you know, you want to have good friends around you that are there for you and aren't just sucking the energy out of you and just want you to give them everything and put in no effort themselves. You really get that in the last third of the book, especially just how controlling this friend is, but how much that serves our MC. It really took a long time for me to get into this book. The pacing was not my favorite. It was super repetitive for like 60% of it. She was a little insufferable, even though I understood she had to be a little insufferable. It was just circles. But toward the end, I was like, okay, like this is getting somewhere. And by the end of it, I really liked the themes so much. I think this is a really empowering read. I think you definitely see a very common theme whenever authors use witches in their stories. They use it as a way to really empower women. They use it as a way to express independence and just sisterhood and all of that, and you really get that in Cackle. I still ended up giving it 3 stars because I still think 60% or 70% of the book being a little dragged out is too much for me. And the real star of the show was a little spider named Ralph. He sounded so adorable. And that says a lot because I can't deal with spiders. It's just, ugh, it's such a thing. In the book, it didn't actually gross me out, and that little spider Ralph was so cute. 3 stars and 5 stars for Ralph. Now for some of my worst reads ever. I received the ARC for The Longest Autumn, and let me just tell you, that was like the longest book ever. It really did feel like the longest freaking autumn. That book was so long, so slow, and so pointless. This book was compared to Ariadne, and Ariadne was a 5-star read to me. Now, even though I don't expect them to be exactly the same, there were some themes from Ariadne that we were promised we would see in The Longest Autumn, like the tragedies of women, how women are blamed for everything. That is a huge theme in Ariadne. It's just a very tragic book. So I was expecting something similar to that in that sense, the theme sense. And it just felt so awful and so pointless and so bad. Now, I had already heard some bad reviews because it didn't have the romance it was promised. And I do have to say that is an issue. If you are promoting a book as forbidden romance and dark romance, then your readers are going to expect you to deliver on those things. And it really didn't. The romance in here is very non-existent. It is so overly sexual, like the pacing is just very strange. And although you guys know I'm not a smut fan, I'm not like, oh, well, 0 stars because you had smut. Like, that's not what I'm here for. But when it is constantly in there, and when the pacing is off, and when I even read reviewers who love those type of things, who love smut in books, rate it low because they also felt the pacing was weird, I was like, okay, it's not just me. It's not just because I don't particularly enjoy this. Other people who also enjoy open door scenes also had an issue with this pacing. It was just so strange. Everybody was sleeping with everybody, but for no reason at all. She was supposed to be solving this huge mystery around this mirror being shattered that she was blamed for, and stripped her of her huge honoring role in this temple for the god of autumn. Like, this is so important to her, and she just wandered around for literally like 80% of the book. It was just nothing. It was just nothing. I'm sorry, can you tell I'm still triggered and I'm still frustrated? It was just insane how nothing happened in this book, and yet everything happened with everybody else. And then at the end, you know, there were certain characters that I was getting interested in, and that ending was just so pointless. I really don't recommend this book, and I felt so bad. Like, this should just show you how much this book negatively impacted me. It's also a debut book, and I just feel so bad because I don't like rating debut authors low or anything like that, but man, the pacing, the storyline, the theme, it was just not there, unfortunately. So I did end up giving this book 2 stars, although it really does feel more like a 1 star to me. I really had to force myself to finish this book. This is one of the most difficult books I've ever had to read or get through, so that should tell you something. This was really the month where I read some of the worst books of my reader life, because the other book I read was One Day in December, and this was also a 1 star, maybe 2 star read just for the friendships. One Day in December is actually a Reese Witherspoon book. Can you believe it? I'm like, Reese Witherspoon picked this book. And normally the books that she picks are really good. And if you want me to make a video on Reese Witherspoon book club picks, I totally will. And I'll tell you what I think overall about her book club. But honestly, I was surprised this was a book club pick. Like, I kind of see why it would be a good choice, but ugh, it was so bad. So first of all, this is classified as a romance book, and I picked it up for a book club that I wanted to join, which I couldn't even make to, so it was just a waste of a read, honestly. So already by me telling you that it's a romance book, you know it has to have a happily ever after. This is something that my romance reader friends, shout out to you guys, kept reminding me over and over that romance books have a happily ever after. Even though I hated the MCs, like I did not ship them at all, a friend was like, Joanna, it's romance, it's gonna have an HEA. And I was like, well, already that's just 1 star then, because I'm gonna absolutely riot. This book has a lot of things that I think a lot of people don't enjoy, like a lot of tropes that people have a really big issue with. And I don't know how much to tell you on here because I don't wanna spoil it for you. But let me just say that the way they get together and the reasons why and all of that stuff, it's really bad. Like, I think if we knew these characters in real life, you would not be rooting for them because they are just awful with their community is all that I'll say, okay? She is not very kind to her best friend. He gave me the ick by the end of it, and like, what reader would want to ship a guy that gives them the ick with the MCs? Like, and now their journey to getting to each other was imperfect, and I think there is space for that, right? I would love to see more books where it's not a perfect love journey, right? Where life happens and you make the wrong turns, or maybe you're not fully sure about each other quite yet, but this book was not it. So the only reason I think Reese Witherspoon might have thought this was a good idea is because it is an imperfect love story. It's not just like, and then I saw him and things are great and we had miscommunication trope. No, it's like a whole life happens before they get their HEA, but it was just plain terrible. And the only reason I considered giving it 2 stars is because I actually love the friendship in the book. I wish it focused more on that. Like, someone tried saying that this book is more about the friendships than it is about the relationship, and my gosh, I wish that were true. If that were true, I would have rated it way higher because their friendship just meant the world. Like, who doesn't want that type of friendship? It reminded me a lot of Happy Place by Emily Henry. The reason I rated that book so high was because I just love the friendships and I just love their traditions, and I just loved that they had found a family. And this is something you see here too, because the MC lost their sister at a very young age, and she basically found another sister that she loved so much, and they had such beautiful moments together. Her name is Sarah. I can't even remember the MC's name because I just disliked her so much, but Sarah was such a wholesome friend. Like, she is the type of friend you would want in your circle, in your corner, rooting for you, and she was just treated like a freaking rag thrown in the corner that was previously set on fire and used to pick up the most gross things ever, and so you just like dump it somewhere. Literally, Sarah deserved better. Justice for my girl Sarah. What was funny is, as I was reading this book and doing updates on Instagram, so many people were DMing me that they hated this book, so much. And I'm talking about my romance reading book peeps. They are the ones who told me they absolutely hated this book. So I was like, all right, if I end up hating this book, it's not not because romance isn't my favorite genre, it's because it's legitimately bad. If the romance readers are not here for a one day in December, then it won't be a bad thing if I'm not either. I really gave this book a shot, okay? I really gave this book a shot and it was freaking awful. So I do not recommend you read this. Don't even waste your time. If you're curious about what tropes I'm talking about that are in this book, you can feel free to comment or DM me on Instagram and I will tell you everything, okay? It's just so bad. But in case you still decide to read it or you really love it, I don't want to spoil it here for you. What a wild reading month. Literary fiction, fantasy, magic realism, romance, all of these different genres I tried this month have really led me to the worst book ever, but also some really amazing reads. I really hope you enjoyed my January wrap up. Thanks for hanging out with me and I will see you in the next video. Bye!